Title of my talk today is solving a 250-year-old puzzle, right, using complex networks. Okay, solving a 250-year-old puzzle using complex networks, right? More specifically, a 250-year-old economic puzzle using complex networks. So I work in the area of monetary economics. And many years ago, when I was thinking about getting started with my PhD, right? I asked a professor of mine, Pierre Garello. I said, Professor, what would make a good PhD? I was in my early 20s, and Pierre said, you have to solve a puzzle. And somehow it stuck with me. And this morning I was having a conversation with, what's your name again? Jitin from CDS, and I was, this is why I was prodding and asking you, why are you doing your PhD? And Jitin also gave some, very good answers. He wants to have an impact on the world. Me, I never wanted to have an impact on the world. I couldn't care less about the world. I just wanted to have, the kick of having solved a puzzle, right? So then this means that I would never be a vice chancellor of a university, and Jitin would probably be, right? And those are lives that people choose, right? So me, I want to solve a puzzle, and then at some point I got into admission to a PhD program after a lot of difficulty, for good reasons. Right, and here I was, and at some point, some part of my mind was looking for a puzzle, right? And I would keep reading. It wasn't like I would sit down and every day just look for puzzles, but some mind was, because you have other things to do, like cook and right, eat and other things to do, right? So, and then pass exams and all of that, right? But somehow, for some reason, I would actually pay great attention to what my teachers taught in terms of economic theory, right? Puzzle, what is a puzzle? A puzzle, for instance, would be something where theory predicts A, but reality is A naught. That's a puzzle. Okay? That's a classic puzzle. So and if you could solve one such puzzle, then great, right? You made a contribution. If you die, you still made a contribution to economics, right? It was much more difficult to imagine changing the world before I die, right? So I think that's much easier to solve a puzzle in some senses, right? So I don't know, Jitin, right? Right. Okay. So here I was reading some material, and by this time I'm in my sort of late 20s, almost 30. I came across this phenomena which I thought was very strange. Okay, and the phenomena is the following. There's this paper I was reading which said if you put money into an economy, some prices temporarily fall. And if you take money out of an economy, some prices temporarily rise. Okay. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the quantity theory of money, you will understand how counterintuitive this is. Okay. What does the quantity theory of money say? The price level, in some sense, is the relationship between the quantity of money in an economy and the quantity of goods and services. So, if you put money into an economy, there is more money, price level should rise. If you take money out of an economy, the price level should fall. Turns out this is true in the longer scheme of things. 2 quarters after a monetary injection, price levels do rise. All price levels rise. 2 to 4 quarters after a monetary extraction, right, all prices do fall. Okay. But this puzzling phenomena in the short run, 1 or 2 quarters down the line, right, prices were behaving, moving in the wrong direction, so to say. At first, I thought this was just one quirky paper. So then I looked up who the authors were. The authors were actually people who were kind of associated with the Federal Reserve, so they had some kind of credibility to them. And then I thought, one paper, two paper, paper after paper. Right? This was very strange. So I began working on that puzzle, and I'll tell you, how we, resolved the puzzle and the difficulties involved in resolving it, and how complex networks were essential to resolving this puzzle. But before that, about 2 years down the line, after having sort of worked on and somewhat resolved this puzzle, I was doing my postdoc, right? And I had presented this work several times, and my postdoc advisor said, there is a seminar happening here. Do you want to present something? You have to. So I said, sure. I was too bored to present the same thing again, because this puzzle has been solved, right? And then I started looking for another puzzle, and the other puzzle I found after that was, not only do some prices move in the opposite direction in the short run, the price level itself moves in the opposite direction in the short run. Okay, so there is something called the price puzzle. If you do a Google Scholar on price puzzle, you will see the price level itself in certain cases, in certain countries for certain time periods, which is all you can say for anything statistical. Huh? You won't get universality of things. The price level itself moves in the opposite direction. That is, negative monetary shocks or money extractions temporarily lead to a rise in the price level. 3-4 quarters down the line, there is no problem. The price level does go down as the quantity theory of money predicts. But in the short run, you get a counterintuitive movement. Okay, and then I started working on this as during my postdoc, and we were able to resolve this puzzle as well. Okay, right. So today I'm going to talk about how we resolve these two puzzles and what that means for monetary theory more generally. Okay, right. But let me get started by telling you that the second of the two puzzles, right, it is of course been documented by several econometricians, but the first person to talk about this puzzle of the price level moving in the opposite direction temporarily is Thomas Tooke, nearly 250 years ago. This economist called Thomas Tooke, nearly 250 years ago. Okay, in fact, Thomas Tooke, after looking at data, of course, much in a sort of less sophisticated manner than what the way modern econometricians would deal with this data. Thomas Tooke, after looking at this data, said the quantity theory of money is not only wrong, or it's not only not true, it is the opposite of the truth. It is the opposite of the truth. Okay. At this point, another economist, Knut Wicksell, whom many of you might have heard of, right? Knut Wicksell got very upset with this remark that Tooke had made, because for Wicksell, the quantity theory of money had made sense. Ricardo had proposed it. Well, not Ricardo. There was a French economist who proposed it. Ricardo had kind of refined it with the velocity of money and so on. This made good sense. And Wicksell just couldn't accept, what Tooke said. So Wicksell ended up writing a whole book about this called Interest and Prices, proposing an explanation for this phenomena, right? And Wicksell's book then became the foundation for Ludwig von Mises's business cycle theory. Okay, right? But again, these are good things to know, right? Although today we do not have time to talk about Wicksell's book or Mises's business cycle theory, but just so that the first person to note this puzzle, right, about price level moving the opposite direction was Thomas Tooke 250 years ago. Okay, then Wicksell writes his book, and somehow after that it's forgotten for many years, and somewhere in the mid 90s, Keynes calls this the Gibson's paradox. Gibson is some sort of lesser known economist. And Keynes basically notes that Gibson had documented this and says this is the Gibson's paradox. Okay. Early 90s, Christopher Sims calls this the price puzzle. That's where the name the price puzzle sticks. Okay. And the command from up above is that make the puzzle go away. If the puzzle is arising in your econometric models, in your statistical models, that means the statistical models are misspecified, because theory says this is not how price level should behave. If theory says this, and theory coming from Boston is always true, right? So then you mediocre econometricians must have gotten things wrong. So look into your model again and put whatever needs to be put in to make the price puzzle go away. Right? One of the saddest empirical papers I read basically begins by saying that since price puzzle should not happen, or wrong directional movement of prices should not happen, we are going to try to throw the kitchen sink in to make it go away. My own impression is that's not what empirical economists should do, right? Empirical economists should never take theory as truth, but merely a set of propositions. And my job as an empirical economist is to actually figure out whether theory is true or not. So regardless of what message is sent out of Boston or Stanford or wherever else, right? My job as an empirical economist, regardless of where I work, maybe in Wayanad, right, maybe in Delhi, is to actually see if there is reasonable evidence to support this theory, or maybe there isn't. Maybe the evidence is mixed, right? To begin by saying the theory is true is I think not doing your job as an empirical economist. I think very important, because lots of people in India do work on empirical questions. Okay, that said, let me get on with what we did. Okay, so note that the first puzzle we tried to solve was not the price level moving in the wrong direction. At that point, I didn't even know that the price level moved in the wrong direction. Okay, of course I did not know because it was hidden. The theorist said that this should not happen, so it was never mentioned in textbooks. Right? You have to kind of, it's somewhere there, but it doesn't enter undergraduate. When we teach undergraduate students the quantity theory of money, we never tell them that some prices actually move in the opposite direction, and the sum is not actually 2%. Right? The papers reporting this report up to 30 to 40% of the prices moving in the wrong direction for 1 or 2 quarters. And the movement in the wrong direction is not small. It's about the same order of magnitude as the movement in the right direction. So for instance, if the monetary extraction is such that a year from now, all prices are going to fall by 1%, in the first quarter, lots of prices are rising by well above 1%. So the wrong directional movement is about the same order of magnitude as the right directional movement. So it's a substantial problem, but again, it's missing from undergraduate textbooks. It's missing from graduate textbooks. I never knew about it, but somehow I came across this paper, and there are lots of papers reporting this, right? And I started wondering, why is this happening? Right? Why is this happening? What's going on? Okay. At that point, I was, Rob Axtell, in fact, whom you listened to earlier, had told me, I had just begun my PhD, and I asked Rob, what is the frontier area to work in economics? What should we work on? And he said, networks are going to be very important. Okay, this is 2012. He said, networks are going to be very important. And he sent me, later on, initially sent me a paper by Acemoglu on networks, right? It's not the stuff that Acemoglu got the Nobel for. But Acemoglu, I suppose, could get Nobel for multiple things, right? And then he sent me another paper on networks, and I was already working on firm bilateral networks. Right? So imagine I'm a firm and I produce steel, and Navneet is a firm and Navneet produces iron ore, right? So I buy iron ore from Navneet, right? And Professor Sujin is a firm, he makes coal, right? I buy coal from him, I buy iron ore. This is how much I know about steel production, by the way. My knowledge of steel production stops here, right? You buy pig iron and you buy coal. There's something called smelting, and iron comes out of it, right? So, or steel or whatever else, right? I don't even know the difference between iron and steel, quite honestly, right? But that's it, right? So this is and of course they also have there's a supply chain. They are also buying from inputs. I am also selling inputs. This model we were working on did not have any consumers in any serious sense of the word. There is one representative consumer. But really it's a model of firms buying and selling from each other. There's a large nexus of firms who are buying and selling from each other, right? And one thing I tried to do was, we just ran this experiment where we put money into some firms. And here, by the way, this is how the model ran. Every time step, I have some money, and what I do is I spend all my money to buy inputs. So suppose I have 100 rupees, I spend some portion of it on Navneet, and I buy pig iron, some portion of it on Sujin, and I buy coal. I produce steel, I sell, I get money, and next time step I repeat. And they do the same thing. So model is relatively simple. Of course, it took several years to, it's not as simple as I make it sound, but it is simple but not simple, okay, right? So a relatively simple model, and what we decided to do was, I said, let's inject money into some firms. By the way, our friend from the Reserve Bank of India would tell you that he would be aghast at how we are modeling monetary injections, right? Because monetary injections are very sophisticated, right? They would go and, I don't know how the Reserve Bank of India does, but at least in the US, the Federal Reserve would go buy or sell treasury bills. There are brokers who, who actually deal in treasury bills. The brokers have accounts in certain banks. The money first enters the accounts of those banks. From that, there it goes to other banks who have accounts in those banks. And then it's given out to real sector firms who have applied for loans. So if there is a monetary loosening, you might get a loan that you might not have gotten otherwise, etc., etc. So it's a whole percolation through the financial system and then to the real sector. So I didn't want to deal with the financial thing. I'm a very real person, right? So then there was direct monetary injections. Okay, direct monetary injections. Pick some firms and give them money. And the idea of picking some firms, again, this was, I think PhD students should work on things they want to work on and really not listen to their professors too much. A little bit, yes, but not too much. I'll tell you, if I had listened, not my professor, but if I were at a mainstream school, and I was not, and if I were doing this, I would be told not to do this, because why would some firms get the money? If interest rates have gone down, they've gone down for everybody. What is the rationale for some firms getting the money? Right? In fact, there is strong rationale, and I'll tell you what is the strong rationale for some firms getting the money in a moment. All of that I'll come to. But our initial experiment was the following: pick, let's say, 10% of the firms, we double their money holdings, okay? And then, of course, this money would percolate through the economy, right? If I am one of the people to get new money, I would increase my demand for nominal demand for pig iron and coal, right? I would get more pig iron and coal and produce more. Right? Then Navneet and Sujin get money, and they will spend on inputs they want to spend, and the money would percolate through the economy. Okay. Now, when we were looking at behavior of at that point not price level, just all prices. So suppose you have 100 firms, we have 100 price time series, right? And one thing we saw that if you inject money, right, okay, and if you look at the system after, let's say, a year or 2 years, you don't run it for a year or 2 years. This is year or 2 year in the real world, which is about an hour or two on the computer. So this is what Rob Baxter was talking about, that if you can have a model which is a one-to-one mapping of the real world but runs much faster on a computer, right, it can be a particularly useful way to study certain scientific questions, okay, right? So we run this model, and the quantity theory of money predictions come very true in the longer scheme of things. You are at one equilibrium, you inject money, the system goes through some disequilibrium, there is percolation of money, blah, blah, blah. In the long run, everybody's money holdings has increased because the money has percolated through the system, okay, right? And all price levels have gone up. So all good, right? It's a little bit like this. Suppose you have water in a container, okay? Think about a fish tank, right? And you drop a few drops of ink. Initially, there is disequilibrium because the ink is kind of percolating. But if you wait sufficiently long, you will get water where ink is equally spread through water, right? Of course, this percolation of ink through water and network percolation, the mathematics of it would be slightly different, right, or significantly different. But nonetheless, as an intuition, that's a good place to get started with. So in the long run, quantity theory of money was percolated. But we got this strange phenomena happen in the short run. In the short run, some prices actually fell. About 20-30% of the prices actually fell. Okay, and initially I was very surprised. At that point, I was working with this friend of mine, Dawood Tagawinejad, right? And the first paper on this was is co-authored with Dawood and Antoine Mandel, who was later my postdoc supervisor, published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. Okay, the paper is titled "The Price Effects of Monetary Shocks." Okay, I believe I'm getting old. I cannot remember the name. I never could remember things. But okay, fine. Okay, so we were getting these effects. It wasn't clear. So I would ask Dawood, this effect is happening. Do you know why it's happening? And Dawood, for him, it wasn't clear. So we would go and keep running these experiments. Okay, what was clear to us is that if you equiproportionally gave money to everybody, suppose there is a 10% monetary injection and you divide it up equiproportionally amongst everybody, then prices don't move in the opposite direction. But the moment the injection is disproportional, we get wrong directional movement. It was incredible, and we would plot these histograms and we would look at it, and our first suspicion was there's something wrong in the model, there is a bug that is producing this. We looked through, we couldn't find anything, and then yes, fabulous, this is great, right? So then I wrote up a paper which was entirely wrong, right? I wrote up an explanation as to why this is happening. It's only a year or two later I realized that this was wrong. So if you go read my PhD dissertation, it has a wrong explanation of why this is happening. The model was producing this, but not for the reason that I had thought then. Okay, it was only much later I figured out. Again, the reason I'm telling this story is none of these stories would be there in the scientific papers. Scientific papers, you get a finished product. So what young PhD students try to do, what is the finished product I can get to? Okay, so this is not a finished product I can get to, this is a finished product I can get to, let me work on this. But the finished product you're seeing there did not come about because somebody just woke up one morning and was able to write up that finished product. It's a long process of phenomenal mistakes. And my mistakes are documented. You can go read my PhD dissertation. It's wrong. Right? Now I can say this because the university can't take my PhD away, hopefully, because if they take it away, then I can't have this job, so there are other problems. But okay. But anyways, long story short, we just did not understand what was happening, why this effect was produced. But again, we could calibrate the model to get 30 to 40% of the price moving in the wrong direction. We could get it to move in the wrong direction for 2 quarters. We could get it to move the wrong direction both ways. If you put money into some, then some prices fall. If you take money out of some prices rise. Okay? And for a year or two it was great. Then I went to Paris to do postdoc, and Antoine Mandel was the one who explained to me as to why this is happening. Okay, we had some kind of, Dawood and I, we had some intuitions as to why this is happening, but Antoine really sort of laid it bare and made it very clear. Okay, the reason why it was happening was the following. Okay, which is that, and quite honestly, just in terms of history of thought, the first person to model percolation of money in this way was Richard Cantillon. Okay, the French economist Richard Cantillon. right? On essays on market or essays on commerce or something of the sort, and all you have to read is 2 pages. By the way, I cite the 2 pages in my original GBO paper, which I just told you about, right? And Cantillon talks about farmers get new money, they pass it on to someone else, they pass it on to someone else. There's a little bit of this percolation also in Hume, but most economists don't pick up on this, okay? By the way, also, our model has perfectly flexible prices, right? There is no sticky prices in our model. I wanted to get away from sticky prices, I don't believe in the sticky price story one bit, right? So I want to get away from sticky. There's no sticky prices, but you still get these kind of strange behaviors, right? And here is why it was happening. Here is why it was happening, right? Suppose you get new money, right? And you increase production. There is no guarantee that the next period or the period after you will meet higher demand, because the nominal demand for your goods depends on the money holdings of the people who buy from you, right? Their money holdings may not have gone up in the first round. Their money holdings may not have gone up in the second round. It may take time for them, for the money to reach them. Just like the ink percolating, right? This money is percolating through the network of firms. At some point, all firms will get a share of the new money. They may not have gotten the new money. So you may be able to increase supply, but higher demand has yet not been realized. At that point, you will actually decrease prices because supply has gone up, but the demand has not gone up as much. So injection of money can lead to a decrease in some prices. It's only a question of where the decrease happens, right? And the most important thing is the fact that the injection is heterogeneous. Not all firms get new money, and there is a process of percolation of money. Okay. Once Antoine laid it out, it was very clear why this is happening, right? But of course, it was not clear at all prima facie. This is again one of the beautiful things about science, right? A good explanation should seem simple. Like once it happens, of course, like the earth is round, kind of a thing, right? A good explanation, of course, right? Anyone should be able to understand there's an of course moment. A sign of a poor explanation is that it's very difficult to understand. Right? So this is another thing I have to say to students. If you're sitting in a classroom and your professor goes on and on about explaining something in the world and you cannot understand it, there's probably a good reason you cannot understand it. It's bogus. Makes no sense. Your mind is not able to make sense of it because your functioning human brain is just not able to make sense of it. It's nonsensical. Doesn't matter if it comes from Stanford or Boston, doesn't matter. Nonsense is nonsense, right? So do pay attention to the discomforts of your mind and not so much to your professors. That's my kind of message to students, right? I mean, you have a dedication to the science of things, right? Okay, good. As it is, it doesn't take much effort to pass the exams, right? You can keep that as a side thing and always pass exams. It doesn't take much effort, right? So we discovered this thing, right? And then we ended up writing a paper, blah, 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 got all of it done and out, and that was that, okay? At that point, I didn't think much of this, except that, I had explained something cool, right? Any questions at this point? Yeah.
What was your explanation, the wrong explanation?
So wrong explanation, okay. So wrong explanation was the following, right? Wrong explanation comes, and I'm glad you asked the question. So these are very good questions from the point of view of science as a process. Right? Looking at finished products is not useful. Right? It's the years that go by, and in terms of planning your life, you're not jumping to the finished product. The psychological experiences that you have are the years of. Yeah. Same thing goes with developing a company of your own or whatever else, right? Look at Amazon today, it doesn't tell you everything that the founders and the employees went through all these different years. So my wrong explanation originated in the following manner. I would present this at seminars, and I was at George Mason University, and one day I was presenting this at seminars. I would show the plots, right? I would show a plot of this kind, right? So let's say this is time, right? And these are prices. And suppose I have 100 prices, right? And I normalize all of them to 1. So all prices normalize to 1. And suppose monetary shock happens at this time step, T is 0, right? And monetary shock is an injection. There's a monetary injection. I put money into some firms, right? And I tell them that, look, some prices are going up, right? And there are some prices that are, actually most prices are going up, but substantial number of prices are going down and then, going up. And in the long run, all prices go to 1.1 after a monetary injection. But in the short run, I'm getting some prices falling. So I would show these plots, right? Today I thought I get the plots, but once you're into plots and stuff, the story goes away. I mean, we can do that another point of time. And I would give them, I say, I don't know why it's happening. I don't know why this is happening. And there was a graduate student in the room, Patrick Newman, right? Many things I forget and some things I don't. Patrick Newman raised his hand. He said, I know why, right? Patrick is not responsible for my wrong explanation, but I will tell you how Patrick later. He said, I know why. Ludwig von Mises in a book says why this happens. Ludwig von Mises, he has a book called Theory of Money and Credit. Okay? It's a very difficult book to read, but terribly insightful. And Ludwig von Mises said that periods of money injection can generate, inflationary periods can also see some prices falling. And the reason why it happens is because those who are hurt by inflation may have to reduce their prices. Okay, so I was trying to tell a story of why some people are hurt by inflation, something around elasticities of supply and demand. It was a wrong explanation, but maybe I was grappling towards the right explanation, but just didn't reach it. But that's the kind of story. But Mises already had the insight. I think the theory of money and credit is already 20 years before World War II. I think I've gotten the dates slightly wrong, but there's an English version already post 10 years after World War II, right? So Mises already had some insight as to what's going on, but it took time to lay it all out. So, but if you want the detail, I can go to my PhD dissertation and send you the chapter. So enjoy it exists. So. Nonetheless, Patrick Newman pointed me, and I read those chapters. Mises is the first economist to actually point out that this is theoretically possible. Theoretically possible. So again, I think one of the things that students should do is do not only read stuff that is prescribed. Go read whatever you like to read. There's a sociology to science, right? The reason why some things find their way into textbooks and some things don't is not merely a question of the evolution of truth. It's also an outcome of the sociology of science, right? And the evolution of truth and the sociology of science, they're not necessarily conjoined processes. They can temporarily at least move in opposite directions, right? And we like to believe that in the longer scheme of things, they move in the same direction, are conjoined processes, but that's a belief. But in the short run, most people would agree that some things can be left out, although they're insightful, and some things can be included, although they're not very insightful. Okay, so Mises already had this in a loose fashion, some senses, right? And we laid it. We did it, and it was done, right? But from a macroeconomic point of view, it's and again, our friend from RBI would tell you from a macroeconomic point of view, explaining why some price move in the wrong direction is cute, but it's just cute. It's not like a big thing from a macro point of view. So when we do macroeconomics, what we are talking about is things like price level, GDP. In unemployment, investment, we are talking about aggregates. Okay, so from a macro point of view, it's exciting to explain something about aggregates. Anyways, it's one day I think the reason this happened was Antoine was saying, why don't you present something? I was his postdoc, and he said, why don't you present something at this seminar? I said, fine, and I was tired of presenting this the doctoral stuff. I had presented this about half a dozen times in the wrong way. And then about twice in the right way. It didn't make sense to present anymore. And I started looking for something new to explain. And since I was already working in price, I looked at stuff, and I recalled I had read somewhere something called the price puzzle. Looked for further, and indeed there was something called the price puzzle. This was the issue that not only some prices, but the price level itself moves in the wrong direction temporarily. This is what got Thomas Took upset, and I realized there was much more to the problem than I initially thought. Because my initial thing was this problem has to do with movement of some prices. But I realized there was much more to the problem than I had initially thought, because the price level itself is moving in the wrong direction temporarily. Okay, again, this is very interesting. In the long run, all good. If you extract money from an economy, right? In the long run, if you extract money from an economy, all prices fall and price level itself falls, right? In the long run, if you put money into an economy, price level rises. If you don't believe me, look at Lucas's Nobel lecture. Right, he summarizes some work up to then, right, where you see these plots: money supply on the one hand, price level on the other. Money supply grows, price level grows, all of that. Okay, but temporary movements are in the opposite direction. Okay, right. So I started wondering, how is this happening? Okay, it's not very clear to me how this was resolved. I know the evening in which this was resolved. It was cold and dark in Paris, as always. I was alone in this building. As often, not the whole building, but in particular space I was working. There was a computer in front of me as often, and I was doing something, I was producing some plots. And as I started doing experiments, I realized that for some experiments, the price level would move in the opposite direction. And for some experiments, it would move in the right direction. This was very frustrating. If it always moved in the right direction, I would just give up and go home. If it always moved in the wrong direction, then yay, I'm done, right? I have something to present tomorrow. This was very painful. So I kept doing more and more experiments. Then I would run batches of 9 experiments and get all 9 plots together. Out of 9, 5 in the wrong direction, 4 in the right, 3 in the wrong direction, 4 in the right. I said, should I go home? Should I give up or should I not give up? It's almost like the business of dating, right? Are you interested in me? Are you not interested? Can you give me an answer so we can get done with this, right? So, right? So I stuck with it, and I don't recall the exact sequence of events, but essentially the solution came out again to be very relatively simple. Okay. First of all, what is reported as the price level is something called the consumer price index. Okay, so in most of these papers that report price level moving in the opposite direction, they are using not just any arbitrary average of prices in the economy, but the consumer price index. Okay, and they may be using consumer price index, urban or rural or whatever. Some of them also do it with the producer price index, but the effects with producer price index, the wrong directional effects, are much less pronounced. And in some cases don't exist. They are most pronounced and nearly, well, not always, but substantial number of times exist when you use consumer price index. Okay, this was the first clue. Consumer price index is not random average of price; it's the average of prices of consumer goods. That is average of prices of firms selling downstream. Okay, and since I was already working with the supply chain model, there was something called downstream. Most macro models don't have a supply chain. Now more and more macro models begin to have that, but back then most macro monetary models, again you can ask people from RBI and so on, but most monetary models even today don't have a supply chain. But I had a supply chain, so there was a sense in which there is a downstream price. If you have a representative agent model, none of this would make sense because it's the price of that one firm. But if you have many firms and they're in a supply chain, there is such a thing. So clearly downstream firms are, moving prices. That is when the economy gets a negative monetary shock, downstream firms are raising prices. And the question was, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Okay. Now, one thing is very clear. All of this has to be a story of demand and supply. Demand and supply can take you a long way in economics, by the way. Yesterday, we had some wonderful conversation in the evening. Some of the KEA members are here about violence. Okay, and we said if there's violence, there must be demand for violence and supply for violence, right? Violence in India or certain parts of Africa, whatever. And then the query from an economic point of view is what is generating this demand, or what is generating the supply, or violence, for instance, in certain colleges in Kerala, right? I would not name which, right? I would not even look roughly in the direction. Right? I said, the students are engaging in violence, they're supplying violence, but there's also demand for violence from political parties. So, right, and then our issue as economists is to figure out where is the demand and supply coming from, and what is the opportunity cost? Why don't the people who supply this violence, supply their entrepreneurial talent in starting a new company? Right? What are the trade-offs and why are they doing it, and how does the economic environment encourage one and not the other? Right? Right. So we were talking about all this, and this is true. But Professor Harikot, yeah, your question, yeah. Not a difficult one, please.
No.
I beg of you.
No, I was just thinking if you can show me the plot, if it's available right now with you. I didn't really get that the absolute price level coming and the price level coming. What's the difference between these?
Right. So the plots I'll have to pull up. I purportedly didn't get the plots because once there are PowerPoints, I feel the story is missed. I think these kind of exercises, first there should be a storytelling. There is a second talk we can do more technical, and the third talk can be even more technical with equations and everything. But let me tell you the story. So the first puzzle is that suppose you have 100 prices in an economy. 100 prices meaning 100 goods. Okay? Or you can think about 100 aggregated at a much lower level. Let us say tomato prices, potato prices and so on. There you see that if you give a positive monetary shock, some prices actually temporarily fall. It is not that some prices rise and others have not yet risen. Right? And then over time, all of them rise. That is not what is happening. It is actually some prices fall. Some rise, some fall, and then after, even the ones who fall will rise after some time. right? And the proportion which fall in some studies is 30 to 40%. It's sizable, nearly as much as the rise in the first period. In the first period, essentially, what is happening is the shock is leading to a divergence in prices. Not merely divergence in the sense that some are growing and some are going to grow slower. No, some are actually moving the opposite direction. So you get this kind of movement and back.
Convergence point is this one, isn't it?
No, convergence point actually is exactly how the quantity theory of money predicts. A 10% injection tends to generate, fairly high. All prices rise by, let's say, in our model by 10%. In the real world, there'll be some difference, right? But if you compare this equilibrium to this equilibrium, it's exactly what the quantity theory of money says. All the exciting bit happens out of equilibrium in between. I think that's the key about. That's another thing that we wanted to push with the complexity economics workshop.
Based on some Indian data or prices?
So this actually, the some prices moving in the wrong direction is primarily US work. Price puzzle, which is the average price level moving in the wrong direction. It's been documented for the US, several countries in Western Europe, and also India. Also India. But perhaps you're aware of this work, right? Also India. Actually, there are I think at least I'm aware of one, perhaps two papers in India. And in our paper, we cite several of those. And there's a very good paper, Rushnak, I think maybe, I forget, who actually summarized the literature. They do like a meta summarize about this literature. So that kind of literature is fairly well established. In a little bit, I'll actually tell you why it bothers macroeconomists so much. Because ultimately, it's not about prices. It strikes at the very foundation of monetary theory. And I'll tell you in a moment why. But before that, we solve this puzzle. So anyway, here we are, right? So I realize that it's consumer price index. So it's the price of downstream firms. And if prices are rising, and suppose we had to resolve it through demand and supply, what do? Right? If price is rising, then one of two things might be happening. Either demand has gone up, or supply has gone down. Okay, there must be some disproportion. And demand and supply for what? Since we are downstream, this is the demand and supply of consumer goods, not producer goods, consumer goods. If you remove money from an economy, right? Suppose interest rates go up, right? There is no reason to again, let me just repeat the puzzle. You're removing money from the economy and price level is temporarily rising. Long run, it falls, right? Question is, price level is temporarily rising. Either demand for final goods has gone up, but that's difficult to establish. Interest rates have gone up, presumably consumers would buy less of final goods, right? So demand for final goods has actually fallen. It cannot be that the demand for final goods has risen, right? So the only thing you're left with is that the supply of final goods must contract, and sizably so. In fact, if the demand is contracting a bit because of the increase in interest rate, supply must contract even more, right? And then you will get a rise in the in the consumer price index temporarily, right? And how to make this, their production contract, right? Only downstream. This was very strange. So I was sitting there in my office and it was evening, 7 or 8, and I wanted to go home. I had to find a way to get the downstream firms' production to contract, right? Although monetary policy is equal for all in some senses. So why would downstream firms contract? Then when I looked at the literature, I don't think that evening, next day I started looking at the literature. There is a strange phenomena that happens, right? Which is that by the way, it is well known in the literature that small firms are more affected by monetary shocks than large firms. This is very well known. Okay, reason is large firms like Google or Facebook or Amazon, right? They sit on sizable amount of internal funds, cash. Okay, so if the interest rate goes up, they would just substitute the external finance with internal funds. Their activities and production activities are not affected. Small firms don't have large amount of cash holdings. They actually do depend sizably on external finance. Okay, so when there is a negative shock on the economy, when RBI or Federal Reserve raises the interest rate, small firms are much more affected than large firms. This is well established. Okay. The second piece to this puzzle is that it so happens that small firms are much more likely to be present downstream. Upstream firms are your big utility companies, electricity producing companies, steel producing companies, coal producing companies, right? Downstream you have lots of small players, your barbers, your boutiques, right? Lots of small players. So just because small firms are more present downstream production contracts when there is a negative monetary shock. So the supply of downstream goods goes down. Demand does go down, or what you may call aggregate demand or aggregate nominal demand goes down, but the supply goes down so much that temporarily you get a rise in consumer price index. You have other strange things. By the way, when the supply of downstream goods is going up, upstream firms are benefiting. Why is that? I don't have money to purchase raw materials. Those raw materials will be purchased by some upstream firm. I'm a boutique, I can't hire somebody. Amazon's, Amazon is kind of downstream and upstream, but forget Amazon is a bad example. But take a utility company, electric company, right? I'm a boutique, I don't have money to hire this person. They can hire this person. So upstream firms actually do expand production. Downstream firms contract production, upstream firms so there's all kinds of fabulous supply chain dynamics that is happening after a monetary shock, which is just not there in your traditional models. Okay, so ultimately this became not only about kind of explaining one puzzle or the other, but just the fact, how do we understand monetary dynamics, how do we understand the percolation of money in an economy, how do we understand employment dynamics, unemployment, output dynamics and all of that. So that's where the research program started to grow. Then I kind of detracted with the fight with my previous employer, and now I've tried to come back, right? But I have a little bit more to finish, but let me take one question from the Reserve Bank of India.
Implied that monetary policy has an impact on the supply side of the effects when the firms constrict their supply in response to demand monetary shocks. It has also a supply side impact, which is very different from the traditional argument that monetary policy operates with the aggregate demand.
Yeah. So let me actually repeat the question. It's a fantastic question. Does this mean that monetary policy has an impact on the production of goods and services by firms, by companies, on the supply side, on the production of real goods and services, right? Instead of primarily, let's say, operating through the aggregate demand, nominal demand channel? I would say yes. Because in this case, the aggregate demand actually falls. If the supply channel is unperturbed, price level would have fallen, right? But the price level rises because supply contracts, downstream supply contracts sizably. In fact, there is expansion in supply upstream. Monetary contractions in the short run take resources away from downstream firms and push it to upstream firms. And monetary expansions in the short term take resources from upstream firms and give it to downstream firms. So it's actually moving resources. You're doing a lot more than you think you're doing. Right? You're actually moving resources all around, right? Let me actually make the last comment. Yeah. Contractions tend to move resources from downstream firms to upstream firms. Expansions tend to move resources from upstream firms to downstream firms for the very simple reason. If there's a monetary expansion, right, a big utility company, General Electric, it's sitting on so much cash, it doesn't care about a tenth of a point or a base point. I don't know. I mean, they know the term increase or decrease in interest rate, right? But a small boutique downstream, it might get a loan. It's going to expand production. It's going to hire somebody away from General Electric. Right? It does happen both ways. There is an asymmetry there. The size of the effects are not the same both ways. We can come. It's not very clear agriculture is downstream. Depends. Some part of agriculture is downstream because there is growing of crops which directly go to the plate. Then some part is kind of middle stream because the crop has to be processed and there is soup and the soup goes into a container and then it comes. If agriculture output goes into, yeah. For small farmers, I would say downstream, right? Also because it helps my story because small people should be downstream, right? So anytime you say small something, I would say downstream. But no. Okay, in that paper we do plot the size distribution of firm and sectors. But again, none of this work has been done in the Indian context. In the Indian context, price puzzle has been reported.
Then you could actually categorize them like still downstream.
Okay, so if you want to, so your question is, you're doing your studies at CDS, right? Okay, so if you want, this is a very good PhD dissertation. So it's not very easy to develop an index to say which firms are downstream, which firms are upstream. Okay, because any index of saying which firm is downstream or upstream has to do two things. One, I'll send you a paper that I'm working on this. There is some, yeah, but the first thing is not answered. But go on.
So the same agent or like similar agent supplies to like small farmer to do different activities. What do you place?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was coming to. Right? So I'll send you a paper I'm working on this with a research assistant of mine called Ashwin. Right? And Ashwin is now breaking his head over this thing, and essentially, you have to begin from the final consumer. If you're supplying to the final consumer, you're most downstream. But what happens exactly as you ask? What's your name again? Shabir. So Shabir says, what happens? I'm a company that supplies to the final consumer. Okay. But I also supply to somebody very upstream. Okay, here is a company that does that, Apple. I supply phones to final consumers, but I also supply phones to electric companies or coal mining companies because their employees use my phone. They produce coal, coal then used to make steel, steel is then used to make buildings, buildings are then used by people. So they are both downstream. So then you have to have weights, and it has to be a recursive definition. You are downstream if you sell to downstream people. You are upstream if you buy from upstream people, right? So you have to have a recursive definition, which is possible to do. In fact, in this paper, we do a recursive definition. The only thing that is stopping us is to actually give some empirical content. We needed a large data set where we know the sectors in which different firms are. And we are struggling with the data part. But this is readily doable. And there's another paper which does this before. They do such a poor job. So this paper of ours does a much better job. We can talk about it. I'll send it to you. So I'll send it to you. But anyways, long story short, we do find this puzzle coming out for a relatively simple reason, right? Let me make my last remark, and then we can just open up to questions. Why is this? Yeah. Yes, Professor Godwin. Your name is so close to Goodwin, the economist. Do you know this?
It's again puzzling for me as well.
Yeah.
This particular puzzle.
Yeah.
It also depends on the structure of the economy, right? So what proportion, as you've been saying, that's what is not clear to me. See, if you have some economies have a huge proportion of production, this is regulated, controlled by the big
companies.
Big companies, which you call it this upstream.
Well, no, I don't call it upstream. I just find that in the data, right? Going back to Shabir's point, as you move away, if suppose you have an index which tells you which firms are upstream, right? As you move away from the final household and you go upstream, it so happens that the firms are bigger. That's just the reality of industrial organization in the United States. I presume it's true in India, but I haven't looked at the data.
In that case, it depends. My point is, it depends on the structure of the economy.
Professor Godwin, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the crucial points which again we don't make in this paper. That's one of the monetary theory which is devoid of industrial organization, monetary theory which is devoid of the structure of the economy, right? These aggregated kind of theories, it doesn't seem to me that they get to the root of the evolution of economic variables, right? From my point of view, the reason why economic variables evolve the way they do, the way prices evolve the way they do after a monetary shock, right? It has to do very much with what you say, which is the structure of the economy. So I think monetary theorists would benefit by reading all of Leontief's work, right? Where his emphasis is actually the structure of the economy matters. But he's of course looking at real factors. But I think monetary theorists would benefit a lot. And I will make a last remark, and then we can open up the question: why is the price level important? Okay, why is the price level important? Okay, here's the story. Some of you are new to monetary theory, but here's the story. Right? One of the strange phenomena that we observe. Talking about strange phenomena, there is so many in economics, right? It's sad that you open an economics textbook and it feels as if here is an explanation of things in the world. No. Fact of the matter is that there's lots that we do not know. Right? Here is one thing that we do not know. When you put money into an economy, output temporarily goes up. Okay. Now note, money is what? I mean, now of course in the age of Bitcoin it's something else, but right? Money is just colorful patterns on a paper with images of whoever you like as a country. So if you're born on this side of the border, you have one image. Another side of the border, you have another image. If you go to Turkey, you have another image, right? And so on and so forth, right? That's all it is. And perhaps our friend from RBI will tell you how much it costs to print a 500 rupee note. Not a whole lot. Right? Now suppose I print patterns of paper and throw this in this room. Why should it be that output goes up? What is output? Bread, bridges, neurosurgeries, haircuts. I still have them. They're not called haircuts anymore. Right? I go and say shave, and the guy knows exactly what I mean. Right? So none of these things go up because I've just thrown, right? How do you get more bridges? You get more engineers. How do you get more bread? Either you have better technology to produce bread or you've had a better harvest. But throwing colored pieces of paper doesn't give you better monsoons. It doesn't give you more engineers. So why does output go up? We don't really understand why output goes up. So there are lots of theories. And if you read Lucas's lecture, Nobel lecture, Lucas says, when I was a young man, I read Hume, and David Hume was saying, when you throw these pieces of paper, and Hume has this analogy, through adding money to the economy is like relabeling things from, let's say, the, Indian Arabic, whatever numeral system to, I don't know, you pick your favorite. And if you just read to a Roman numeral system, suppose you rename it to a Roman numeral system, why should production increase? Worse still, if you change the color of the note, why should, you get more bridges? Right? It's not very clear at all. And Lucas says, oh, then, I worked so much and now I have better insights. I'm not sure, but, maybe he does, okay? But point is not whether Lucas has better insights or not. Point is, it's not something that we understand very well. But the predominant theory explaining this requires the price level to move in the right direction immediately. And price level moving in the wrong direction completely destroys it. Okay? The predominant theory explaining this is something of the sort. Okay? You put money into the economy and there is one representative firm which uses labor to produce output. And of course, I'm simplifying. Okay? Wages are sticky. Wages are sticky. You've signed contracts with workers, right? You guys will tell me that it's not that sticky, right? Workers will rebargain, right? But the story is the following. Wages are sticky. You put money into the economy, wages are sticky. So wages cannot go up immediately. Price level goes up immediately. Okay? What has happened to real wage? It's become lower. Real wage is what? Nominal wage divided by the price level. For the company's point of view, you can sell goods at higher prices and workers you still pay lower wages. So what should you do? You've become a more profitable company. You should expand output. This is the predominant way to explain why money injections lead to temporary increases in output. Okay, and then they say in the longer run, the worker will renegotiate wages, nominal wages go up, real wages are the same, the company contracts production, everything is back to normal, right? This is kind of, right? Now, but if the price level moves in the wrong direction, what do you have? You put money into the economy, wages are sticky, prices actually fallen. If price has fallen, real wages have gone up. If real wages have gone up, you should actually contract production. But you don't see that. You put money into the economy, you never see contraction of production. Which means that if you accept the price puzzle as not a puzzle but a reality, then it hits at the root of monetary theory. You know the phrase, Houston, we have a problem. Boston, we have a problem. Okay? Right? Okay? Boston, we have a problem. So, pick your favorite, right? Or Chicago, we have a problem, right? So, so this issue hits at the root of economic theory. Right? I'm going to close my talk here. I'm happy to take questions, right? Last thing I would say is that lots of us are faculty members here, and I've been a teacher to Navneet, and he will testify that at least with my students, I always ask them to think through things and do things that they want to do, and not listen to their faculty members, not listen to undergraduate textbooks, not listen to graduate textbooks. They're here to think. Okay, only thing we should teach students is to think, right? And some of the material that's available is useful, right? Demand, supply, whatever else, right? Even things that are wrong, your own or other people's, is useful. Useful to kind of pursue life, right? And as students, I think you should be ambitious, right? I think it's fine to do empirical work, but you should have a sense of why you're doing empirical work. Either you're trying to falsify theory or to kind of provide some evidence to support it, right? Or you do theoretical work, which is also perfectly fine. And there are many ways to do theoretical work and so on and so forth. Okay, let me close my talk there, and then I can take some questions. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Wait, I think Professor Godwin, do you want to take a mic? Is a mic here? Is this tied to the thing? No, that's fine. No problem. No, is it okay if he speaks in the mic? Okay, that's not going to disturb you? Okay, fine. Yeah, Professor Godwin. Yeah.
No, two things. You said you don't believe in sticky stuff. Meaning, you think, for example, wages.
Yeah.
you can't reduce, right? Meaning, for example, even the casual laborers. So in that particular sense, don't you think they are sticky? Most of a lot of economic variables.
Yeah.
And the second one, meaning discussing about the it's important also to look at the details, but and more often to get the final products. But don't you think that's a kind of careful or rational kind of thinking individuals do, because in a kind of a complex millions of products, etc. So would you get any time to look at the details? So that's actually a practical choice individuals have given, even if they are researchers. The examples are many.
Professor Godwin, I think the first question is very rich. Second, of course, is somewhat more difficult to address, right? The second question involves persons, personalities, the ecosystem you're in, who are your friends, who are your teachers, what are the lunch conversations, and so on and so forth. First question is, of course, a little bit easier to answer, but also difficult, right? So first question that Professor Godwin is asking is, I said, I really don't, buy this kind of sticky price paradigm, right? And don't I think that prices are sticky, wages are sticky, workers, rebargaining wages is not easy. So let me give you a little bit of background, particularly for the students. There is the whole literature about sticky prices causing, you remember the example I gave as to how sticky wages are causing this output to rise temporarily, right? That whole literature was challenged at some point by rational expectations paradigm, right? In the early 90s, there was work trying to give micro foundation to sticky thing. It's not an irrational thing. It's not an exogenous thing. There is market structure and wide variety of other behavioral factors which can cause stickiness in wages, in prices, and different kinds of stickiness. For the students, a place to get started is Mankiw's paper, the Sticky Price Manifesto. Is it Ball and Mankiw? I believe so. The Sticky Price Manifesto. There is only one paper called the Sticky Price Manifesto. Okay, and they lay out why they are developing this paradigm to give micro foundation to the idea of sticky price and so on. Okay. Now, Professor Godwin, my only contention is the following, right? If you look at empirical data, right, it would be difficult to argue that prices are not sticky. Okay, but where is the stickiness coming from? Is it that individuals are not adjusting prices? For instance, my friend Sachna, suppose she's running a company and she has workers, right? Are the wages sticky because she and her workers do not renegotiate wages? They have a problem renegotiating wages, they're stuck with the contract. That's one view, right? Another view is that the percolation of money takes so long that prices take time to change. So in that sense, prices can be sticky without there being any stickiness at the individual level. So she and her worker may be perfectly flexible in terms of recontracting and renegotiating wages, but the percolation of money takes so long that their wage will change, maybe a quarter or two from now. So there is stickiness, but it's not originating from micro factors, but from the system level things, which is interrelationship between firms and people. That's the way I would kind of think about it. What that means to me is that it's not very clear to me that the dynamics of macro variables necessarily follows from stickiness at the micro level, right? And the question was then, suppose you have perfect flexibility at the micro level, can you still explain, certain features of macro variables? That was the idea. So I think in some senses, you and I agree with regards to the empirical facts that prices are sticky when we look at the data. I think that the only point of discussion would be, is it emerging because of stickiness at the individual level? And again, there may be some stickiness at the individual level, and I think one thing that you pushed back even in your previous question, that you seem to have a deep concern for the specifics of the structures of an economy. That there might be certain kinds of stickiness in Kerala, which might be not there in Tamil Nadu, which might not be there in Switzerland, and so on and so forth. So whenever we explain economic dynamics, we have to be much more concerned with the specific cultural, institutional setting. I agree with you. But when we're trying to do theory, what we're trying to do is, if we strip everything off and we get rid of stickiness completely at the micro level, can we still explain things? And the idea was that some portion of the stickiness at least is emerging from the percolation of money and the time it takes for the disequilibrium to unfold. The second question that Professor Godwin asked is equally important, perhaps even more important for the students in this room, which is that what kind of things should you work on for your PhD? Should you be very ambitious? Not? How much detail should be there in your model? It's not very clear. I think we overestimate the contribution of individuals, right? So I think a Nobel Prize to Rob Lucas is never a Nobel Prize to Rob Lucas. It's a Nobel Prize to the whole history of people that he met, the discussions, the conversations, the environment, and all of that. which is why you see repeatedly Nobel Prize from the same environment, which is partly also lobbying, but partly also just the fact that certain environments are very conducive to novel work. So I think there is no individual answer. I think the challenge is for educationists like you to kind of create environments which support novel thinking. I think as a young student, one of the more scary things is that if I engage in novel thinking, will I have time to finish my PhD? Right? Can I get the one publication I need to get a job after this? So on and so forth. So an environment which has sort of a calming effect on the students, or an assurance of, finding a job after the PhD, something of the sort. I don't know what, or general a culture of why are we doing academics at all, right? Again, Coase, earlier I was mentioning Ronald Coase, his work on the nature of the firm comes out of a question that a teacher of his asked when he was an undergraduate student. If the teacher never asked this question, and presumably, and it seems, at least from the story that Coase tells, teacher asked this as an open question, that we don't know the answers to this. If the teacher actually was pedantic and taught this as a closed thing, Coase would have never thought that this is a question worth answering. So I think a lot of the responsibility, it's all in your hands. Right? Maybe one more question and then we can close the session. Last question maybe? Do you have any remarks? Can we take the mic there? These may be the most valuable words spoken in the last hour and a half.
Best spoken, credits to you. It was very interesting. So, if I understand this price puzzle now in the mainstream literature also, when they go into it and try to kind of solve it, they bring about this whole idea of expectations and say asymmetry in information. So, in a network kind of framework, how would you look at this whole idea of expectations anchoring that would seem to kind of, like you say, inflation targeting, expectations anchoring, which would help to solve this.
Yeah. No, again, a very difficult question. Let me answer this question too. Before answering the question, let me repeat the question. In the mainstream literature, there are actually multiple ways to solve the price puzzle. Again, to repeat, the price puzzle is wrong directional movement in the price level. Okay, right? One of the approaches, there are two predominant approaches. One of the approaches, I didn't want to get into details of that because I don't like to spend time talking about other people's work, right? I am too full of myself, as Navneet might attest to that. No, I mean, I can talk about other people's work, but that may be another workshop, and then we can get into technical details, that will be another workshop, and so on and so forth. But one of the kind of, so two answers. A question is that, do we consider expectational questions in a network framework? Well, but let me tell you in expectational things in a non-network simple setting. Here is one of the mainstream explanations of the price puzzle. I am the central bank. Okay, what is the puzzle? I increase the interest rate and price level actually goes up. It should actually go down. But here is an explanation. I am a central bank. I have this foresight that price level is going to rise by 10%. Okay. Not because Professor Sagar wakes up in the morning and he has this foresight. No, they have deep models, right? And they've figured out that some event is going to happen in the future, right? Let's say a bad monsoon is coming, right? Output is going to shrink here or there, and therefore the price level is going to rise. And the prediction is going to rise by 10%. I'm going to increase the interest rate. I increase the interest rate, and instead of rising 10%, it actually rises 5%. Okay? Now the data shows I've increased the interest rate and price level has actually gone up by 5%. But in reality, I have made it go down from a rise of 10% to a rise of 5%. So really there is no puzzle. Only problem with this explanation is that empirical evidence doesn't support it. So when you control for central bank decision, when you control for all the information they have about the future, the price puzzle doesn't go away. This should go away if econometrically you control for all the information they have about the future. It just doesn't go away. Okay, again, in our paper, by the way, our second paper on price puzzle is called Monetary Dynamics in a Network Economy. It's published in the Journal of Economic Dynamics and Control with Antoine Mandel. Right? In that paper, again, in the introduction, we review some of this literature. The writing is much quieter than I would have liked it to be. Right? My senior colleague is much more reasonable person than I. right? Nonetheless, yeah. So it's just that when you econometrically control for all future information that central banks have at the point of making decision, the price puzzle doesn't go away. There's one more explanation which is called the cost channel, but I wouldn't get into it right now. But your more substantial question, I think, was in the models that we use, right? Do agents have some forecast of prices? At the moment, not, and that is one of the biggest weaknesses of these models, right? So, for instance, if I am buying from Navneet and I get new money, I spend all of it on Navneet and Sujin's this thing. What I should rationally do is, if I think that prices of output is going to go up tomorrow, I should not try to sell everything today. I prefer to keep inventory so I can sell some tomorrow at higher prices. If I feel that price of input should go up tomorrow, I should try to buy as much as possible now and hoard inventory of inputs. We don't have any of that behavior in this thing. We don't even have these agents trying to forecast future prices. That's the next stage of models that I'm trying to do now. We're trying to introduce some kind of machine learning where the agents use past prices, right? Some limited knowledge of past prices, their own prices, some, maybe not all prices in the economy. There's no firm is going to make, because firms are not interested in forecasting price level per se. Maybe some large firms, but most firms would like to forecast input prices and output price. That's what you're concerned with. You're not concerned with all prices, right? So if each agent is a machine learning kind of an algorithm which is trying to use some information to forecast its input price and output price, and then it's not very clear how to get them to, like, what would be the optimal behavior in terms of hoarding inventory output, and then to see how the whole dynamics of prices changes once agents are doing this. But doing this is not trivial at all, because this model as it is was a mess, right? To settle it, I had hair like you before I started working on this model. Right? First iteration I lost my hair, next iteration I lose my head. So it's risky business, so to say. But indeed, that's what we are trying to do now. Thanks to an IIMK grant, I have a reasonably big machine sitting on my desk to run these simulations. But the amount of effort involved is sizable. Right? It's one thing to use one machine learning box to parameters predict. It's another thing to have a bunch of these boxes all interacting with each other, because if you get an outcome, it's not clear whether there is a bug in the code and where. Is the bug in the box? Is the bug in the connection between boxes? Or is it really an emergent phenomena which is kind of exciting? By the way, those of you who are interested, students particularly, there's a paper by Rob Axel called Understanding Our Creations, right? Where he says that in these large models, it's not very clear what comes out is an emergent phenomena or just a bug in the code, right? So because once models become sufficiently complicated, it's very, very important to in detail sieve through the model. And there's a big problem in science. We tend to stop when the results look like we want them to look. If the results don't look like what we want them to look, we keep going. The moment they look like what we want them to look, we stop. Right? It could well be a bug. Right? And that's where, again, Professor Godwin, it goes back to your point. What is the community like? Can you share this work with other people? Can you make presentations? Are they excited? Do they push you back? Right? And that's development of science is a question of ecosystem like much else. Right? So that's my answer. So maybe we can close now, or you have a question? No? Okay. So then we can close. Thank you so much.